My father went on a business trip and brought back a girl and asked me to treat her well. As a result, the next day, she leaned on my brother, slandered me for bullying her, and asked my brother to take charge of the matter for her. My brother and I looked at each other. My brother helped me hold her arm to prevent her from escaping. I slapped him. A bastard girl is so arrogant. What an uneducated thing. 1. My father came home from a business trip. Before he left, he called us and said he would bring me a gift. My brother and I looked at each other. A man who has little affection for his family and has never fulfilled his responsibilities as a father. You're actually going to bring us gifts? Looking at the slender, pitiful-looking girl beside my father, I sneered. An illegitimate daughter who has been raised outside for 18 years? It is indeed a good gift. Seeing that I looked down on that girl, my father frowned and said, "Your sister has lived without a name or status for 18 years. Now she wants to return to her roots. Nicole Wallace, you and your sister need to get along well." I clenched my fists as I stared at the girl in front of me who looked exactly like the person who killed my mother. My brother beside me coughed lightly, and I turned around and looked at him. After getting a hint from his eyes, I exploded. I went up and slapped the girl. Because he had learned karate before, the slap was loud and fierce, knocking the illegitimate child to the ground. I sneered. The mistress's child still wants me to take good care of her. It's a favor if I give her some leftovers. You bastard with dirty blood, you actually want to be on equal footing with me. Being insulted by me with such words, the girl covered her face and sat on the ground crying. Before my father could get angry, my brother pushed me to the ground and slapped me. My brother said to me angrily, "Nicole, how dare you go against your father? You have no respect for your elders." I fell to the ground and looked at my brother with an unwilling look on my face. Dad was very pleased with my brother. He patted him on the shoulder, but when he turned to look at me, his face was cold. "To compensate your sister, I gave all your mother's shares to Melissa Wallace. Forget it this time. From now on, if you dare to bully Melissa again, I will make you pay." After saying that, Dad turned around and left. Melissa quickly got up from the ground, covering her swollen right face, glared at me fiercely, and followed her father. Seeing that the person had left, my brother wanted to help me, but I slapped his hand away and got up quickly. My brother anxiously checked my body. "Were you hurt when I pushed you just now?" I waved my hands while tidying up my clothes. No, the carpet is awfully thick. Nothing's wrong with me." On the other hand, Melissa sat on the floor with her tailbone probably broken. My brother burst out laughing. The nanny invited us over for afternoon tea. The spring afternoon sun was warm and bright. My brother took a sip of coffee and saw Melissa circling around his father on the second floor. A trace of contempt flashed across his handsome face. The daughter of a mistress who only knows how to hang around men is not worthy of taking my mother's shares. I smiled and whispered, "Brother, you have to learn to be patient. After all, it will take a lot of effort to kill her." After that, we smiled at each other. Then enjoy the last peaceful time before the storm. 2. My brother Frank Wallace and I are from the same mother. Before her family fell into decline, it was one of the wealthiest families in Beijing. My mother was the only daughter in the family, but she was not good at choosing men and fell in love with my father, a poor man. My father made his fortune with the help of his wife, but he cheated on my mother when she was dying, which pissed off my grandfather to death. He even took away the property my mother left us and gave it to her mistress. Fortunately, the mistress died early, leaving behind only Melissa, the illegitimate daughter. Our original plan was to wait until my brother took complete control before we dealt with those two bitches, Dad and Melissa. I didn't expect my father to be so impatient. He sent Melissa to Wallace's house before she could even stabilize her own property. Although the plan needs to be advanced now, my brother and I will take back all the things that belong to us. However, a little strategy is needed to deal with this matter. Melissa is indeed cutely silly. She thinks she is the heroine and everyone should treat her well unconditionally. Therefore, when her brother doted on her, she was not at all wary and even enjoyed it very much. After the Wallace family became rich thanks to his daughter-in-law, my father thought he had achieved success and began to relax his management of the Wallace family little by little. Until recent years, my brother has almost completely taken over the Wallace family business, and has become the default person in power among the wealthy families in Beijing. Originally, my brother and I attended various banquets held by wealthy families. Melissa was envious and jealous when she saw me wearing a beautiful evening gown and luxurious jewelry. So she acted coquettishly to her brother and said that she wanted to go too. I made a big fuss about it, which only made Melissa more determined to get involved. In the end, my dad stepped in and scolded me for being ignorant and not giving in to my sister, so he asked the nanny to take away my clothes and give them all to Melissa. Melissa thought she had won a great victory and held her brother's arm like a victorious fighting cock. I watched them leave with sympathy on my face and felt sorry for my brother in my heart. Melissa came from a common family, and even though she had looks comparable to mine, she couldn't learn the interpersonal habits that I had developed since childhood. Not to mention walking manners, dining habits, and ballroom dancing techniques. She doesn't know any of these, how dare she argue with me? So 2 hours later, my bestie sent me a message to complain. Nicole, your brother is out of his mind. Why did he let your illegitimate daughter out? She doesn't know how to do anything. She even stepped on my foot when she was dancing just now. Damn it. I looked at my phone and burst out laughing. I can imagine Melissa being clumsy and at a loss. At 11 o'clock in the evening, my brother brought Melissa home. As soon as I entered the door, Melissa glared at me fiercely with red eyes. I shrugged innocently. My brother patted my shoulder, not even bothering to hide the gloating in his eyes. The group of the city's second-generation rich went crazy tonight. Everyone knows that I have a bad relationship with this illegitimate sister, and they don't avoid me when they make fun of her. I quickly glanced at the messages in the group and found that what I guessed was correct. As expected, Melissa started to make a fool of herself after she went there. Whoever she talks to is always polite, but they usually just say a few words and then leave. I laughed secretly. Nonsense, you are an illegitimate daughter, and you still want those arrogant young masters and young ladies to be enthusiastic about you? Later, when they were dancing, my brother was invited by his business partner to a private room to discuss a project. So Melissa was left on the dance floor. Then, because she couldn't dance, she stepped on every male partner she danced with. When we were changing dance partners, he even stepped on my best friend. My best friend Thea was very sarcastic. Some people should not try to fit in if they can't. It's funny that they make themselves look like clowns. Melissa's eyes turned red on the spot. When her brother came back, she didn't dare to complain, for fear that her brother would think she had behaved poorly and would not bring her next time. The social circle in Beijing is so small that after a new character finally came, the bored young masters and young ladies started to dig out her identity after they finished laughing at her. By the time she went to bed at night, almost all of Melissa's ancestors had been dug up. 3. The next day at school, Melissa got up early, put on light makeup, and sat at the dining table to eat. I arrived at the restaurant on time and saw my brother peeling oranges for Melissa with a caring look on his face. Melissa caught it and ate it. She was so jealous that she almost lost control of her facial expression. I tried hard to hold back my laughter, but when I saw my brother turned his back, I couldn't stop laughing at his misfortune. After I finished my meal, the driver outside opened the car door and took Melissa and me to school. In order to compensate Melissa, Dad transferred Melissa to our school, told Melissa to study hard, and then went to the club to hang out. The partition of the luxury car slowly rose up, and Melissa stared at me provocatively. I went to a cocktail party yesterday, and the young masters and young ladies from the wealthy families all liked me very much and talked to me. So many gentlemen have asked me to dance. This is a privilege you, sister, cannot enjoy. I rolled my eyes at the roof of the car and pulled out today's French newspaper to read. My mother studied design in France when she was young, so she wanted me to learn French and insisted that I read French newspapers every day. Over time, the housekeeper also developed the habit of putting French newspapers in the car. Seeing me like this, Melissa picked up the newspaper on the seat and tried to read it even though she didn't understand it. I sneered but didn't say anything sarcastic. When I arrived at the classroom, I sat in my seat and watched Melissa introduce herself with a smile on her face. After the introduction, the teacher assigned her a seat, and James's seat was the only empty one in the classroom. The teacher was hesitant and was still thinking about whether to move the table again. Because James is my fiancé. Melissa is the illegitimate daughter of Wallace's family. According to General Mary Sue novels, if the two of them get together, there will definitely be some story. Melissa knew James Caden's identity and immediately volunteered. "Teacher, I'll sit with this student." The teacher looked at me awkwardly, and seeing that I had no objection, he could only nod. The classmates around felt a little more disgusted when they saw Melissa rushing up impatiently. I remained calm, took out my notes and started reviewing, letting Melissa pester James. James is aloof by nature, but he is surprisingly patient with Melissa. After a morning, Melissa started calling James, "Brother James." Thea saw me doing my work slowly, and at first she seemed a little worried for me, but then she seemed to be thinking about something. I was a coward for 2 weeks. Until the group assignment in the economics class, Melissa took my seat and insisted on being in the same group with James. I sneered, stood up from my seat, grabbed Melissa's ponytail and dragged her into the bathroom. The students around were watching the fun. The one who was on good terms with me quietly stood up and blocked the boy who wanted to meddle in other people's business. I specifically picked a pit that hadn't been cleaned yet and threw Melissa in there. Melissa screamed, "Nicole, you bitch, aren't you afraid that Brother James will come looking for you?" I sneered and raised my hand to slap Melissa twice. "Brother James? You two have such a good relationship. You call me so intimately." As expected, she was born by your bastard mother. Being a mistress is a family inheritance. Melissa wanted to resist, but I kicked her and she sat down on the pit, and her school uniform got wet immediately. "Your brother James is not here right now. Let me teach you the rules of a wealthy family." Thea picked up the half-full trash can with a look of disgust, and just as she was about to pour it on Melissa, she was stopped by James, who came over. "Nicole, let go of your sister." I turned around and saw James coming in late in a suit and tie, with the student union president's work badge hanging on his chest. When Melissa saw him coming, she burst into tears. James helped her up distressedly, then glared at me fiercely. "I didn't expect you to be so jealous." I just felt sorry for Melissa because she had gone through 18 years of hardship, but you always made things difficult for her. "I am so disappointed in you. If there is a next time, I think it would be better to marry Melissa than a femme fatale like you." After that, James helped Melissa out of the bathroom, leaving Thea and me alone. Before leaving, Melissa glanced at me with a smile of victory in her eyes. And I did as she wished, putting on an unwilling look. Thea and I breathed a sigh of relief only after the two people completely disappeared from our sight. Thea stretched out her body and smiled. "Melissa was kicked into the bathroom by you just now, and there's a lot of dirt on her body. James is so close to her, won't his clothes get dirty too?" I imagined the scene and was instantly disgusted. "Next time you hit her, change the place. It's disgusting." Melissa finally teamed up with James to complete the economics assignment. However, the teacher still gave Melissa a low score because he could see that the entire assignment was written by James and Melissa was just slacking off. The blonde economics teacher frowned and looked at James on the podium. "James, you and Nicole work so well together. Why don't you work together? Your current team members are terrible and don't think in the same frequency as you do." The teacher was speaking French, which Melissa didn't understand, so she stood next to James with a confused look on her face. The young masters and young ladies in the audience all laughed and turned to look at me sitting in the last row. I remained expressionless, as if they were not talking about me. James was speechless. He just lowered his eyes and apologized in French. "I'm sorry for screwing up this assignment." The teacher glanced at Melissa, who was standing next to them with a pitiful look on her face, sighed, and waved her hand for them to leave. Thea sat in the first row and saw the teacher gave Melissa the lowest score. While grading, the teacher muttered in a low voice, "What's wrong with kids nowadays? They don't want capable partners, they just want to find a pretty vase." Thea burst out laughing. Melissa apologized to James with a guilty look on her face. James ruffled her hair and comforted her softly in return. Since Melissa started school, she has devoted herself to James. After school, she didn't even do her homework and went into the kitchen to bake cookies for James. Although my school is an international school, the school has very strict requirements on students' academic performance. In addition, most children from wealthy families work hard, and they excel in both academic subjects and special skills. Melissa had a poor foundation in academic subjects and she didn't pay attention in class after coming to school. A midterm exam brought her back to her original state. Her grades are even worse than those second-generation rich kids who usually skip school and drive fast. As a vicious villain, of course I have to spread this kind of thing. 5 minutes later, a coded transcript appeared on the campus wall. Because the score on it was ridiculously low, it attracted countless people as soon as it was sent out. Most of the children of the wealthy families in Haicheng knew each other, and with Thea deliberately leaking the news, it soon became clear that the transcript belonged to Melissa, the illegitimate daughter of the Wallace family. The comment section immediately posted the report card for my first place in the grade. We are all Wallace family. Why is there such a big difference? A bastard is a bastard. She's not even as smart as the eldest daughter of the Wallace family. I heard that she and James sat at the same table, and James' grades became worse because of it. James was so busy guiding her that she was a rookie that her economics group assignment scores were extremely low. And this time she dropped to the top 10 in the grade. I looked at the rapidly increasing number of comments and smiled with satisfaction. The transcript was sent to every student's mailbox via email. After Melissa received the transcript, she saw the post again and ran to confront me with red eyes. "Nicole, why did you laugh at me and post my grades online?" The students around stopped writing and watched the fun in silence. I glanced at her, raised my eyebrows and smiled. "Your grades are so bad, and you won't let me tell you? If you have time to confront me, you might as well improve your grades instead of just hanging around men all day." Melissa was furious, but she couldn't find the words to say back to me. James went forward to comfort her, and she immediately leaned weakly on James' shoulder and cried, "I am sarcastic. He's exactly like your mistress's mother, a bastard born of a bastard." Hearing this, Melissa shook off James' hand, turned around, picked up the utility knife on the table and was about to cut my face. James was quicker, snatching it away and throwing it to the ground. Melissa looked at James in surprise, but he smashed the tablet I had placed on the table without changing his expression. "I told you there won't be a next time. You and Melissa are sisters, but you insulted her like this. I am really disappointed. It's time to break up with you, Nicole." James said this with a frosty face, then turned and left with Melissa. Melissa was stunned by the sudden victory and walked away in a daze. The news that James was going to break off the engagement with the Wallace family because of an illegitimate child soon reached the Wallace family. Dad hurried home from the club and cautiously went to the Caden family to inquire about the news. Mrs. Caden greeted Wallace with a smile and gracefully instructed the servants behind her to serve tea to the guests. It's true that our James doesn't have much affection for the eldest daughter of the Wallace family, but the second daughter of the Wallace family is gentle and virtuous, and I like her very much. Only then did Wallace's father feel relieved and continued to enjoy himself away from home. Melissa was so proud to get the information from Wallace's father, and unhappily took a few lackeys to the nearest shopping mall and went crazy purchasing goods. I was drinking afternoon tea in the garden, and my brother was peeling a pomelo and telling me, "Remember to be gentle next time you scold her. If James hadn't acted quickly this time, the box cutter would have landed on your face." I sneered. "When I see her I think of her bitch mom. I really can't help it." My brother paused and I continued. "My mother was already in critical condition at the time, and we finally found a suitable kidney donor, but that bitch snatched it away. We knelt on the ground and begged the old man and the attending doctor, but he said that the bitch was pregnant with his child, so she had to have the kidney transplanted. In the end my mother was tortured to death, but that bitch was fine. She even gave birth to a son, and even wanted to marry into the Wallace family. A female student who was supported by her mother to leave the mountains, betrayed her father and climbed into his bed. She deserves a bad death." My brother peeled the pomelo and placed it next to me, comforting me. "At least now she and her son have been killed in the car accident we designed. Only Melissa and the old man are left. It's much easier to deal with." Mrs. Caden kept her word and held a cocktail party at the weekend to entertain guests, and announced the engagement of James and Melissa. Before the banquet started, Melissa was beaming as she picked out the clothes sent by the brand. Seeing me coming downstairs with a gloomy face, he greeted me with a smile. "Sister is here. Today is my engagement day with brother James. Sister can come and help me choose a dress." I sneered, and when no one was around I picked up the tape measure on the table and tied her up. In order to maintain her delicate appearance, Melissa fasted and stopped drinking water. Now she is no match for me. I met her horrified eyes and observed her with a smile. You're really good at making me angry. Why don't you pluck out your tongue and give it to me? Melissa looked at me with fear on her face. My brother behind me saw Melissa and I tangled together, and he forcefully separated us, glaring at me. Nicole, don't you know your sister is going to be engaged to James soon? You didn't seize the opportunity, and you are jealous of your sister. My eyes turned red and I screamed, I am the eldest daughter of the Wallace family. I am your younger sister. Why are you so partial to this bastard? My brother slapped me in the face with a paw sound and said with a cold face, What do you mean by born from the same mother? As long as he is my father's child, he is my brother. I am not targeting anyone but the matter. You disappoint me so much. As he said that, the bodyguard on the side came forward and held me down. I was forced to my knees and could only hear my brother's voice. Don't go to the cocktail party today. Stay in the basement and reflect on your mistakes. Don't come out until you realize your mistakes. A second before I was taken away, I raised my head slightly. I caught a glimpse of the satisfied look on my father's face upstairs from the corner of my eye, and I lowered my eyes to hide the sarcasm in them. 5. My brother had me locked up in the basement, but he didn't take my cell phone away. I watched Thea reporting the situation at the cocktail party to me in real time. James' mother held Melissa's hand and smiled. James and Melissa looked at each other, and from the angle of the candid camera, they looked quite affectionate. I turned off my phone expressionlessly and went to the utility room in the basement. For more than half a year after my mother passed away, the basement was where I lived. At that time, my brother was sent to boarding school, and I, at the age of 8, was left in the villa and was forced to watch my father bring home different women to have sex. I was haunted by nightmares about my mother's death and often woke up crying in the middle of the night, disturbing my father's mood. Then I would be thrown into the basement. My mother's belongings are stored in the basement. It may seem gloomy to others but warm to me. I opened the door of the utility room closet and slept on top of my clothes. A cool fragrance lingered around my nose, and I had the first good sleep in months. I don't know how long it took, but the door was opened. I tried to get up in a daze, but my brother picked me up sideways with the quilt. Melissa is staying at Caden's house overnight. The old man is going to the club to have fun. Don't worry. I fell into a deep sleep peacefully, and when I woke up it was already noon the next day. I went downstairs to eat and my brother handed me a wooden box. I opened it and found an antique and beautiful jade bracelet inside. I recognized it immediately as a Caden family heirloom. I looked up at my brother, and he said calmly, Last night James's mother gave Melissa a fake bracelet to make the play more realistic, saying it was a Caden family heirloom. She called me to the temple and told me that you were her chosen daughter-in-law and asked me to bring back the genuine article. I picked up the bracelet and found a black card underneath it. My brother went on to explain. The following is from James. He said he was afraid that you would think he was serious about his relationship, so he handed over all his assets to you to show his sincerity to you. I burst out laughing, put away the box, thanked my brother, and picked up my chopsticks to eat. Melissa didn't come home until the afternoon. I was arranging flowers in a vase in the living room when she came toward me in her sleeveless dress with the fake bracelet still on her wrist. She smiled at me hypocritically and picked up a flower that was in full bloom. Sister, you are in a good mood. However, roses represent love. Sister just lost her love. It is not appropriate to use this. I sneered and snatched the flower. This is rose, idiot. After saying that, I left Melissa, who had a grim look on her face, and went upstairs. I provoked Melissa before because she had just come to Caden's house and held her mother's shares, so she was very vigilant. In order to make her trust and appreciate her brother more and let down her guard, I had to play the role of the bad guy. Later, I started smoking Melissa in order to make her rebellious towards me. Let her get close to James and get engaged to James in order to get revenge on me. Now that my goal has been achieved, there is no need to waste my energy on such a bitch. 6. I went to school as usual, but the number of people around me who complimented me gradually decreased. Seeing that I had fallen out of favor, a few people from small families immediately turned to curry favor with Melissa. The other young masters and young ladies from the wealthy families continued to chat and joke with me as usual. After all, they were too disdainful to lower themselves to please an illegitimate daughter, so even though Melissa was engaged, they still didn't get close to her. The days passed like this until I graduated from high school. On the night of the prom, James got down on one knee and proposed to Melissa. I was sitting in the audience wearing a simple and capable suit, looking at them, the focus of the crowd, with an indifferent expression. Melissa was so moved that tears welled up in her eyes and she nodded repeatedly. Just as she was about to put on the ring, Wallace's driver broke into the room and said anxiously, Miss Wallace, something bad has happened. The master has fainted in the club." The people around who were watching the fun were talking about it, and those who knew the inside story were sharing it with those who didn't. Melissa's father is greedy for money and lustful. He has been hanging out in the club for several years and not coming home. Really? How did you know that? Our family has shares in the club, and he is our VIP. And you don't know that Melissa's mom was a student sponsored by his ex-wife. The two of them fell in love with each other and have been hooking up for a long time. Melissa's face turned pale, but when she saw James next to her, who also looked unhappy, she quickly smiled and said, "James, don't listen to their nonsense. Dad must have fainted because he was out socializing. I'll go check it out now." With that, Melissa left in a panic and followed Wallace's driver to see the old thing. I exchanged glances with James on the stage. I smiled, raised my glass to him, and then drank the wine in one gulp. I secretly acquired 80% of the shares of the club that the old man often went to, and now almost all the people in there are my people. Therefore, it is easy to add something to the wine he usually drinks. My brother went to Suzhou on a business trip, and I disappeared again. Melissa was the only one left in the family, struggling to clean up the old man's mess. James's mother heard about this and called Melissa, telling her politely, "The Caden family has a high and upright corporate image. Giving up the eldest daughter of the main wife and marrying the illegitimate daughter is already the limit. If Wallace's father reveals such disgraceful news again, she will have to think carefully about the feasibility of her marriage to James." Melissa panicked. It took her a long time to get close to Caden. In order to be with James, she did not even choose to go abroad to gain experience, but instead chose to study at a not-so-good university in Beijing. She couldn't give up her future just because of a father who was always indulging in alcohol and sex. Therefore, when the old man woke up, Melissa was the first to rush into the ward and ordered him not to go to the club again. Wallace's father looked at the illegitimate daughter he had nurtured and sneered. "What, Melissa, do you think that just because you're in Caden's family, you can boss your father around?" Melissa clenched her fists, suppressed her anger and smiled. "Dad, I'm going to marry brother James soon. Can you just hold on for a few more months? Wallace's father has been hanging out in the club for the past few years, and everyone in the club is obedient to him. How could he listen to these disobedient words?" With a bang, the glass on the bedside was smashed by Wallace's father at Melissa's feet, and the fragments scratched Melissa's instep. "Get out of here. You ungrateful bastard. It's none of your business to meddle in my affairs." Melissa was kicked out of the room. A girl with heavy makeup outside the door saw her coming out and went in with a sweet smile. Not long after entering, the girl's moans and the man's greasy breathing could be heard in the ward. Melissa closed her eyes, suppressed her anger, dialed a number, and whispered, "I want to buy something from you. Yes, something that can make people die silently." As she spoke, Melissa picked up her bag from the seat and left the hospital. I was standing in Wallace's CEO's office, and the sound of Melissa's phone call came through the bug in the compartment of her bag. My brother and I, who were sitting in a chair drinking tea, looked at each other and smiled. We have been working hard for almost 3 years, and now we can finally close the net. 7. 2 months later, the Wallace boss died of a sudden cerebral hemorrhage, leaving behind a huge fortune to his 3 adult children. Surprisingly, in the will of Mr. Wallace, his shares were divided equally, half to his brother and the other half to Melissa. Marketing accounts were gossiping, some saying that the 2 people born to the main wife would kill the illegitimate child. Others said that the eldest son of the Wallace family had a very good relationship with his illegitimate daughter, so he would definitely attack his own sister. At this critical moment, Wallace's former employees suddenly stood up. report the Wallace family for tax evasion and embezzlement of public funds, and request the tax bureau to conduct a strict investigation of the Wallace family. The Wallace family is one of the biggest taxpayers in the capital. Upon hearing the news, the tax bureau immediately sent people to seal off the Wallace building. For a time, Wallace's stock price fluctuated greatly, waiting for the evidence to be found to cause a sharp drop. The Wallace family was in a state of panic for a while, and at this critical moment I disappeared. Melissa was also very anxious about her own interests. She looked at her anxious brother and said anxiously, "Brother, you should think of a solution. We can't let the Wallace family's wealth shrink as soon as it comes into our hands. My brother also has a headache. The shares I hold are not enough to completely control the Wallace family. I am in a passive position now." Melissa hesitated, knowing that if she transferred her shares to her brother, his brother would own 80% of Wallace's shares. She was reluctant, but she didn't have the ability to turn the tide and bring the Wallace family back to life. Just as she was hesitating, a pair of slender and warm hands hugged her shoulders. James's deep and pleasant voice reached her ears. "Melissa, please sign the voluntary equity donation agreement and help your brother get through this difficult time at Wallace's house. You know your brother's character. He won't harm you. Besides, even if he fails, the Caden family will always support you." Melissa was hugged. A hint of struggle flashed in her eyes, and then her tense body relaxed little by little. "Okay, I trust you, brother. I'll sign the contract." After saying that, she turned around, hugged James' neck, and said with a sweet smile, "If I fail, Brother James will support me for the rest of my life." James curled his lips, and a smile appeared on his cold and handsome face. "Of course, my darling." Melissa spent 3 days going through all the contracts, not only transferring the shares given to her by Wallace's father in his will to Frank, but also returning the shares that originally belonged to our mother. In order to show his determination to share the good and bad times with Melissa, James asked his mother to hold a grand 19th birthday party for Melissa at the Caden mansion. As James' fiancée, Melissa has appeared on various entertainment sections in Beijing. She was so moved that she shared with James the antiques in the villa that Wallace's father gave her. Some of the antiques were so precious that they were priceless. For a time, the media were praising their love. I sat in the office of Wallace's R&D department, looked at Melissa's smiling face, and turned off the TV with a blank expression. The director of the R&D department next to me looked at me fearfully. I looked indifferent. "Let's test the new product again. This product must be perfect before Wallace resumes sales. Thank you for your hard work during this period. I will definitely not let you down with your year-end bonus." The tax bureau checked and checked, but couldn't find any omissions on Wallace's part. In the end, the former employee turned himself in, saying that he was unwilling to accept his dismissal, so he produced false evidence to frame Wallace. Wallace called the police immediately and said he would take legal action against the former employee to protect his legal rights. Because his brother obtained 80% of Wallace's shares, he was able to give orders without anyone stopping him, and he quickly stabilized Wallace's stock price. At the same time, Wallace released a trailer for its latest product. The product's built-in black technology and practical skills aroused the interest of countless consumers. For a time, Wallace's stock price actually showed an upward trend. Melissa got drunk at Wallace's celebration party and missed Wallace's new product launch. So she didn't know that the host of the new product launch conference was me, who had disappeared for almost a month. During this month, I led the R&D department to overcome difficulties and completed the perfect finishing touches for the new products developed by Wallace. At the press conference, I wore a suit, had my hair tied up in a neat ponytail, and spoke eloquently on the stage with a page-turning pen in hand. Faced with everyone's questions about the new product, I answered them fluently with a smile, which won the favor of many people. So when Melissa sobered up, what she saw was the media's extensive coverage of me. Melissa had been with Wallace for 3 years and was much smarter than when she first arrived, so she immediately took a taxi to Wallace's. I had expected this and was waiting in the president's office with my brother. Melissa walked in with a sneer, threw the newspaper with the news of my press conference on the table, and asked, "Nicole, why don't you explain what's going on?" I took a sip of coffee and smiled at her. "Melissa, Do you remember what I said to you when we first met? Melissa frowned, and judging by her expression, she probably didn't know why I asked that. I stood up with a smile and walked towards her step by step. I said, "The mistress's child still wants me to take good care of her. It's a favor if I give her some leftovers. You bastard with dirty blood. You actually want to be on equal footing with me." After hearing what I said, Melissa took a deep breath, picked up the vase on the table and was about to throw it at me. As a result, his wrist was held tightly by his brother, who was sitting in the boss chair. She looked at her brother in disbelief and said aggrievedly, "Brother, why are you helping this bitch?" Frank chuckled and shook off her hand, then took out a wet towel from the table and wiped his hands with disgust. "Don't call me brother. You are a bastard born of a mistress. You don't deserve to be called that." Seeing her red eyes, her brother smiled and said, "You know what I thought when I first met you? I thought the same thing as Nicole. Your bitch mom was able to get out of the mountains thanks to my mom, but she turned her back on me by crawling into my dad's bed. You are not satisfied with giving birth to me. You are not sick enough to need a kidney transplant, but you insisted on getting a kidney to save my mother's life. Nicole and I knelt at the door of the ICU for a whole night, begging you to give my mother a chance to live. Nicole was only 8 years old at the time, and her knees were covered with bruises. And you, at the age of 18, walked into my house with a clear conscience, stepping on my mother's corpse, and even enjoyed my mother's shares. Why?" Melissa was defeated by her brother's questioning and fell to the carpet. I sneered. "In the final analysis, you are a fool. You actually believe that we would be nice to the daughter of the enemy who killed your mother. We played the black and white cop for a few years, and you obediently gave up all your shares." "Thank you, Melissa." As soon as she finished speaking, the police broke in and handcuffed Melissa's wrists. "Miss Melissa, someone called the police and said you poisoned and killed your father. Please come with us." After saying that, they forcibly took Melissa away regardless of her struggle. Outside the door were reporters from entertainment tabloids whom I had invited anonymously. When Melissa was handcuffed and let out the door, flashbulbs went off, leaving her with nowhere to escape. 8. Melissa refused to admit the mistake she had made, but the person who sold her the drugs confessed everything in order to mitigate his crime. She didn't plead guilty until the autopsy report of Wallace's father was released. At my suggestion, all the news that had been suppressed in the Wallace family for more than a decade was brought to light because of this criminal case. From his mother sponsoring female students, to female students climbing into his bed, to snatching kidneys, his mother died, and Wallace's father swallowed up his grandfather's property. The story ends with Wallace's father bringing his illegitimate daughter back home, where she enjoys the same treatment as the rest of us. For a while, all the hot searches on Weibo were related to the Wallace family, repaying kindness with hatred, forgetting righteousness when seeing profit, eating up the whole family, the mistress taking over, the cuckoo taking over the magpie's nest. Countless ugly words were attributed to the couple. When the secret that had been hidden for more than 10 years was revealed, everything had changed. I drove Wallace's luxury car and showed up at the gate of Caden's mansion for the first time in 3 years. I wore the Caden family heirloom on my wrist and was held in the arms of James' mother, feeling the warmth of her mother for the first time in a long time. James's mother touched my hair distressedly. "Good boy. I'm sorry for wronging you over the years." With tears in my eyes, I hugged James's mother. James' mom and my mom have been good friends since childhood and have watched me grow up. When she heard that I wanted to avenge my deceased mother, she agreed to help me without hesitation. After some pleasantries, James's mother and I went into the house. James held my favorite snack with a smile on his face. "Nicole, welcome home." James's mother looked at my shy look and urged me with a smile. "Go quickly, silly boy. This silly boy has been waiting for you for a long time." I blushed and threw myself into James' arms. James put down the snacks and hugged me back tightly. "The grievances will eventually be resolved with my efforts, and everything will go as I wish. Don't say that spring is hard to capture. The sun will shine after the clouds. I am also going to my sunny day." Extra postscript. Later, James and I went to meet Melissa. She was handcuffed and looked a little surprised when she saw James. When he saw me behind him, his expression immediately turned into anger. "Nicole, what are you doing here? Haven't you seen enough of my fun? I leaned over James and kissed him on the cheek, clearly stating my purpose. James' face turned red when I kissed him, but he didn't dodge. Melissa was stunned. Whenever she wanted to have close contact with James before, he would push her away every time. She asked James why, and James apologized to her, saying that he had mysophobia and could not accept close contact for the time being. Looking at James, who was holding Nicole's arm with a patient look on his face, Melissa was confused for a moment. Could it be that James's cleanliness is just an excuse to dislike himself? James looked at Melissa staring at him blankly and frowned. I gave Nicole the key to the villa you gave me. That originally belonged to Nicole's mother. You took it without permission. Now it should be returned to its original owner. After that, I took James' arm and smiled at Melissa. I also want to thank you for seducing James. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known that the beauty trap was so effective. You probably don't know, James and I are childhood sweethearts. There's no way you could steal me away with just a few words. Besides, James's mother didn't like you at all. The so-called heirloom she gave you was a fake. It looks quite good on you. The real authentic one is here. I raised my wrist and shook it at her with a smile. Seeing Melissa completely frozen in place, I smiled and waved to her, saying goodbye. By the way, I also want to thank you for helping me deal with that old guy. Thank you. You and your mother have committed so many sins in this life. For the remaining decades, you will atone for your sins by working on a sewing machine in prison. After that, I took James' arm and turned to leave, complaining as I walked. It's really cold and eerie here. James said helplessly. You've always been afraid of cold weather, and you won't wear more clothes even if I ask you to. Why don't you put on my coat first? Melissa slumped down in her chair, her face pale. When the visiting hours were over, she allowed the guards to drag her up and put her back in prison. Her love, career, and life were all ruined. In other words, does everything she has obtained over the years really belong to her? Later, James and I got married. James endured humiliation and used his beauty to stay undercover in the enemy for 3 years. As a recognition, it's time for me to give him a reward. The reward is to give him a status and then let him sell himself to the Wallace family as a long-term worker. Life after marriage was no different from before. He and I lived in an apartment in the city center. He got off work before me, and when I got home, you can see him wearing a white shirt, gray trousers, a pink apron tied around his waist, standing in the kitchen cooking. Looking from the doorway, he had broad shoulders and a narrow waist, and was tall and had long legs. When he saw me coming home, he looked up and smiled before he spoke. His handsome appearance was as beautiful as a painting. Welcome home. Remember to wash your hands before eating.